Hey everyone, welcome to the Optispan podcast. On today's episode, I sit down with Erik Nelson from HumanSync and Dr. Kevin White from Prime Health Associates. Today we talk about a new program that we're developing together around brain health, cognitive decline, and most importantly, what we can do about it. We discuss the overlap between dementia and traumatic brain injury, the importance of lifestyle factors in brain health, and how new tools from advanced diagnostics to targeted therapies might help halt, or in some cases, even reverse aspects of cognitive decline. If you've ever wondered whether dementia is inevitable, I think you'll find this conversation fascinating, and it may just give you a new perspective.
Erik, Kevin, it's great to have you here at Optispan headquarters. I'm glad we were able to all finally land in the same city at the same time, so this is very cool. I thought this would be a good opportunity to sit down and talk about a project that we've been working on for, I don't know, it's probably been 5-6 months now, around brain health and cognitive function, really with the goal of developing a protocol that can be effective at halting or hopefully even reversing cognitive decline in people who are at high risk of dementia, Alzheimer's disease. So maybe the thing to start with is sort of your own personal journey or views on, why is it that you believe there actually are opportunities to have a significant impact on cognitive decline as people get older?
So I'll start with my first. So I was an ICU nurse at Mayo Clinic back in 2016 to 2018. And I started learning a lot. I've always fascinated about, I've always been fascinated with the brain. And maybe I'll back up a little bit before that. So my dad, growing up, he was a neurosurgeon. He was an assistant on the neurosurgery floor at Mayo Clinic. So when I was a kid, I always remember him coming home from work like at 5 o'clock, and I would ask him, "Hey, did you see a brain? Did you hold a brain?" And it was always super fascinating to me as a kid. And then fast forward into high school, I played football and experienced a couple big concussions, about 3 of them. The first one, my memory was completely erased for about 24 hours.
Wow.
So I was on the kickoff team, and I hit somebody, they hit me, he got up, I didn't. So that was my first time. And at the time, I was never thinking about brain health, but that was just another experience in my life that said, wow, like what happened with that? I remember waking up like 3 o'clock in the afternoon the next day after the football game with an orange shirt on that I'd never seen. I go downstairs, my dad's home. He's doing bills at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and he typically works at the hospital until like 5 or 6. And I was just so confused. And he's like, "Do you remember what happened yesterday? You got a concussion in Cannon Falls." I'm from Minnesota. So I was put on a 2-week kind of hold. I don't really remember what the directions were after the injury to recover. It was just pretty much don't do anything, wait a couple weeks, and then I got another concussion 2 weeks later.
Wow.
And then another concussion about like 6 months later. So really bad. I have the ApoE2/3 gene.
Okay, so you're maybe a little protected.
I've got the protective gene. But yeah.
Yeah, we'll get back into your story, but I think this is an interesting aside. So first of all, it was a different world back then, right? People weren't quite so concerned about repeated brain injuries, probably should have been. And I think this link or potential overlap between traumatic brain injury, concussions, and sort of the normal progression of dementia, age-associated dementia, right? I think at this point we don't know, to what extent are they mechanistically similar or identical, but it's certainly been a hypothesis of mine for a long time that there are many similarities. And part of the reason why I bring that up, and we've talked about this before, is I think that if that hypothesis is correct, or maybe even if it isn't correct, some of the interventions that are effective at reducing risk in the context of age-related dementia will also be effective at reducing risk in the context of people who've had multiple traumatic brain injuries.
Right.
And so in this program that we're developing, I think we've certainly talked about the idea that people in both groups, people who maybe have a genetic predisposition or a family history of dementia, or people who have had repeated traumatic brain injury, would be good candidates for the type of program that we're developing.
Even those that are looking just to optimize, I always use the word optimize lightly, because what does that really mean? but people that just want a better functioning brain. I think understanding the reason I'm so excited about what we're doing is because we've taken the time to sit down with your background and your background. We kind of have a good idea on what's going on upstairs, what's the brain made out of, what happens to it throughout the aging process, what happens to it after injury and TBI, and then fitting it to the persona. So if somebody's busy and they just keep on pushing it, maybe they're in the 90th percentile. I don't know how you would measure that as far as like performance at work or performance in life, but they want to move it from 90 to 93%. How do you move the needle just a little bit? So I think what we've put together will help those individuals as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Over the years in my background in the hospital and, in the emergency department, I remember seeing a guy that was he was in his late 50s and he had significant dementia. It was early onset. And the astonishing thing to me was that, one, he was so young. He used to be like I think he was a high school coach or something, but the family was around him and it was just the norm. Like he had a daughter who had a boyfriend there and everything was around, but he had severe dementia. He was there for another reason. But I was just astounded by that. And the thought of, people who have early cognitive decline, it's just, oh, this is the way it is. This is the way this is going to go. And there's nothing really to do about it. And life just keeps going on and we ride that slide down. It just is irritating. And now that there's a lot of tools and things to pay attention to catch that early and make a significant difference. And, so I'm excited about what we're doing, especially because of, personal family issues. I mean, I've got an uncle who I love that doesn't even know who I am anymore. And, my grandfather had, dementia, and we go out to eat and he would look at the menu and he wouldn't even give it any time because it was too much, Now in retrospect, he'd say, oh, I just have what he's having. And he didn't think about it. They kind of confabulate early on.
I think the point that you made is really important, right? That I think a lot of people still believe that there's nothing you can do, right? Mm-hmm. And so for me, that's really one of the big motivating factors is I think we now know there's a lot you can do, right? Yeah. And I really believe fundamentally that for many people, I certainly wouldn't say everyone, but for many people, we have the tools to largely stop progression of dementia and maybe even reverse it, at least at a functional level. I don't want to suggest that we can reverse all the molecular, cellular declines, but I think functionally, in terms of ability to live your daily life, I think we really have opportunities to actually improve things for people on that path to dementia. I'm guessing there's a point where it becomes very, very difficult, if not impossible, to reverse the functional declines. But up until that point, I think there are real opportunities. So for me, I mean, I just see this as something really important to try to develop the best protocol that we can, given what we know today, and put it out there and define how well does it work and educate people around that so that hopefully it becomes more widely understood, what strategies work, when do they work, who do they work for, so that more people can benefit from the current state of knowledge. And of course, that knowledge is going to continue to improve as well. So I'm excited to see, what we come up with and to get this thing deployed. Like I said, it's been a several month process to get to this point. Mm-hmm. I think we're getting close. Mm-hmm. We haven't quite 100% dialed in the protocol. Mm-hmm. But I think we're close. And so my hope is that, sometime in the next 2 to 3 months, we'll be able to sort of roll this out to clients and start to document, what are the changes in function, molecular markers, imaging, all of that stuff to really hopefully demonstrate efficacy. Maybe a good place to start. So you guys talked a little bit about your personal stories. I think almost everyone probably has people in their lives who have, either suffered from traumatic brain injury or developed dementia or both. For me, my grandmother on my maternal side was very healthy until late in life. And then for probably the last 10 years of her life, kind of went down the path to dementia, to the point where, again, towards the end, she didn't really recognize, me or her daughters. And then my father-in-law, amazing guy, lived 25 years with a heart transplant. He's like the poster child for heart transplant at the University of Washington. But towards the end, again, also, went down the path to where, I don't know if he had full-blown dementia, but certainly significant cognitive decline and trouble, even with short-term memory. So it's something that I think everybody's experienced, and it's, it's not only devastating for the person who's experiencing it, but for all of the family members who see that decline, right?
It's pretty much harder on everyone
and
else.
It's probably the scariest thing about aging, right? I mean, cancer's scary, but I think for most people, like, the idea of losing your cognitive abilities is a much scarier proposition.
The control center for everything. Have you guys seen the Bruce Willis updates with what's happening with Bruce Willis?
No.
So he, I think, was diagnosed like a year ago or 2 years ago. I'm not sure the time
Been a while,
frame.
yeah.
I think within the last week, I think he's unable to talk, which is just, it's crazy because, Die Hard, I grew up watching that, and it's like you got this tough dude that can tackle anything. Yeah. And it's just crazy how important the brain is. And it also is fascinating to me that, I know back in 2012, I think this was updated as of 2012, so 13 years ago. 214 medications have been tested. More
for
since
FDA
then.
trials, you mean?
For FDA trials, yeah. And I think one has delayed symptoms by like 6 months. That's donepezil and Aricept. So like there's not, we hear this all the time, how this person's affected. Well, everybody, you just said it, everybody knows someone that's affected, but there's nothing being done about it. Well, I mean, I know there are
People
individuals.
I don't want to suggest
I shouldn't say nothing. I think the bar's so low.
There's no effective therapy in terms of an FDA-approved drug. And I think this is actually a good discrimination, because I just a minute ago said, I believe that we can stop Alzheimer's disease, right? And yet there is no FDA-approved drug. So we'll get into how do you reconcile those things. I think you're right, though, that the way and again, we probably don't want to get off on the tangent of, drugs that target amyloid beta and all that. I think everybody understands that for a long time, the model was that if you could deal with the plaques, that would prevent the disease. I think we understand now that's incomplete at best, if not completely wrong.
Yes.
And yet all the drugs were targeted towards the plaques and tangles. And so, I think we have learned that is not the most productive path. You can maybe get mediocre, mild effects from targeting amyloid beta, but you're probably not going to have large effects on disease progression.
And the reasons why the plaque theory may not be the best theory is because it's a response to something that's happening at the cellular
that's the
level.
current model. Again, people need to realize we are developing models of this disease based on an incomplete understanding of the biology. Yes. The original model was the plaques caused neurodegeneration and dementia. Now, I think the prevailing model is the plaques are a response.
Immune response.
Yeah, or that there are soluble factors that are toxic, and when you make them insoluble, which is the plaques, you're actually pulling them out of solution, so you're reducing toxicity.
Got it.
And then when the plaques get large enough, they actually can cause problems. But that may or may not actually be everything. It's not everything that's going on. There is an immune component. There's probably an infectious component, right?
Yeah.
There's certainly an inflammatory component. There's a metabolic component, right? People, at least some dementias are talked about as diabetes of the brain, right? So it's a complicated...
Toxins.
Yeah, it's a complicated... Yeah, right. And some people probably... metals can certainly contribute to cognitive decline. So mitochondrial dysfunction is going to play a role. So there's a lot happening. I think what's intriguing is it overlaps so much with normal aging. It's just that in some people, they're sensitized to neuroinflammation, neurodegeneration, which is then probably driving the cognitive decline in the brain dysfunction. So maybe let's take a high level and describe kind of what we're thinking about with this program. And then we can talk a little bit about what do we know that probably works for many people.
Yeah, you touched on a lot of things. And like you said, it's a multifaceted, there's a lot of players here in this game. And, a lot of the drugs have focused on the fire, the smoke, not the fire. But there's a lot of things to pay attention to, so it's a pretty robust plan we have going.
So who would be a good candidate for this sort of a protocol in your view? I mean, I know you talked a little bit about, people who are already high functioning, get them a little bit higher. I'm personally less interested in that.
Sure.
I think, but let's talk about like who would be a good candidate for a program like this. And I think one of the important things that we want to accomplish is actually to be able to demonstrate, is it working? And how well is it working?
Yeah. And that's cool because there's a lot of elegant, really cool ways that you can actually really qualify changes, whether it be through imaging and
so quantitative metrics that we can use to assess.
So that makes it
progression.
Yeah. But I think the kind of person that we're looking for would be early findings of cognitive deficiencies, I would say.
Yep.
And so we're just they're kind of off to the races, and to kind of catch them before they go down that slide.
And I can give sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So that's pretty much it. Go ahead.
I might give a specific example on our case study right now. So we've been approved to share information. She even said we can share name, but I'm just not going to share the name.
Let's not do that.
Yeah.
I'm not going to do that. 63-year-old female that lives in Kentucky currently now. So she's actually the first case study at Human Sync for this. So it's not just trying. I mean, it sort of is trying some approaches, but at the same time, the protocol that's being implemented now has been tested in other ways through kind of a longevity medicine lens, but we're kind of double clicking on the brain. So this individual has ApoE44.
So those are the highest genetic risk.
The highest genetic risk. I've heard anywhere from like 80 to 100% chance of getting Alzheimer's disease if you fall within the standard American way of living, because the statistics from that is.
It's high. Yeah. I mean, again, so my understanding is if you're 4.4, it's between a 10 and 20-fold increase in risk compared to 3.3. But, when if you then, say this is somebody who's eating highly processed, high sugar, high fat diet, metabolic disease. Yeah. I mean, I think if you live long enough, it's approaching 100% chance that you're going to develop some sort of significant cognitive.
Yeah. And I've heard that the average person walking around has ApoE33, which is around 9%, 10% risk of getting cognitive decline the older they get. Yep. So you take
again, all of that is risk based on a standard American lifestyle, right?
Yes.
Which is, I think, just really important to say.
Very important. Yeah. So, and this individual I'm working with right now is not living the standard American way of lifestyle, which is very important, and I'll get to the details anyway. So she came to us knowing she's got a family history of Alzheimer's disease. We ran a genetic panel, found out she's ApoE44, and we said, okay, age 63. So from what I've learned is the disease is probably already starting, because it sometimes starts 20 years before symptoms show up. I don't know if it's exactly 20 years or 15 years, but way before symptoms show up, the disease is starting to happen in the brain. So we need to figure out what's going on in the brain. And it's not a super simple equation. That's probably why it's taken us so long to get to this point, is we can't just run a blood panel and say we're all good. We can't just run genetics and say we're all good. We can't just run heavy metals. We have to put everything together into a soup, not an organized soup. So understanding her genetics is key. Family history is key. Understanding her lifestyle and what she's doing for diet, exercise, sleep, stress. If she's eating a processed food and living the standard American way of living, that's going to increase her risk. We don't want her to fall into the standard American way of living. That's like a huge educational piece. Do everything you can to not do that. See how much she's moving. We can go into kind of the lifestyle stuff, but for testing specifically, I wanted to just give an example of how this can be helpful to somebody that's got Alzheimer's genetics or a family history. Is we run a blood panel and added something called p-tau217, p-tau218, and neurofilament light, NFL. So why this is so unique is because you can actually see early signs of plaque development in the brain by measuring these blood tests. It's just a blood test. I think it added $300 to our panel. So the typical panel is around $300, $400. We double that cost, and we run a p-tau and an NFL to find out if there's plaque developing in the brain. Her results came back, and it showed I think the reference range was 0 to 6. She was at like 6.2. So she's on the high end but it's not extremely elevated, but she has plaque development occurring in the brain, which is a very important thing to know. She's got the genetics, she's 63, she's got plaque development, but very low, no symptoms. Every now and then there's some word slippage, I guess. I've talked to her family, like at dinner. Sometimes she'll say something random, but most of the times she's on point. She bikes like 50-mile bike rides in the countryside in Kentucky. I mean, she's very dialed. But NFL is neurofilament light, which is a biomarker of cell death. So I think a huge goal of ours in this brain health program is to understand obviously what's going on in the brain, but make sure if we see early signs of plaque development and we check this NFL and we look for cell death, for her specifically, she had zero, her NFL was pretty much at zero. So there was no signs of cellular death in the brain, but she had early plaque development. So I think our goal clinically and medically, scientifically, would be we don't want the plaque to get worse. And we for sure don't want NFL to get worse. We don't want all of a sudden in 2 years there be high levels of NFL. Because if there's cell death, that means the disease is progressing. She's at the perfect spot right now, given her genetics and the plaque that we know is in her brain is an NFL 0. Keep her where she's at is, I would say, the clinical goal for this individual.
Yeah. I mean, that's really interesting. I'm a little bit less certain about the blood tests. I mean, I agree with you about these blood tests being informative. I'm a little bit less certain how clean the interpretation is. I think it's still, these are fairly new.
Sure.
But I think the blood tests combined with brain imaging and functional assessments, I think if you see a similar pattern across those three modalities, then you can be really confident that you're hopefully preventing progression of the disease. The other point I want to make is, I think we need to be a little bit careful about family reported or patient reported functional declines, right? For a couple of reasons. I mean, one is, somebody who starts high functioning, they can actually have significant decline in function before it really becomes detectable, right? And I think the quantitative cognitive assessments are going to be much more likely to pick up more subtle changes in cognitive function. So I think if somebody is showing cognitive functional decline to the point where friends and family are picking up on it, like, lapses in short-term memory or word recall, that may suggest an even more advanced progression or symptomology than what you would detect with the more quantitative cognitive assessments. But
so we did a MoCA. So we did a MoCA, which is a Montreal Cognitive Assessment.
Yeah.
Normal is 27 to 30, and she had a 29 out of 30.
Yeah.
We also did a brain MRI and looked at all different regions of the brain. Specifically, the hippocampus is always the first one I look at because that's the memory center that shrinks with age.
Yep.
Hers was normal. So that made me think that her lifestyle that she's doing, her diet is dialed. Her sleep needs a little help. Her gut is a little off. But she's exercising so much. I almost think she's over-exercising a little bit, but she's delivering oxygen to the brain. And I believe the tissue is just thriving still because of that. Despite the genetics, that's just my theory. I know oxygen's important for the brain, but I think it's just not talked about a whole lot.
And I mean, I think what I would say is, people who have the ApoE4 allele, whether it's one or two copies, can, to a great extent, offset their increased risk of dementia through a healthy lifestyle, right? And we've talked about this before on the podcast. So, I mean, this may be a person who, has done a pretty good job at reducing her elevated risk. And so it's a matter for her of just, dialing that in, right? And keeping her at as low a risk as possible, right? And so again, I think lifestyle, like with longevity, is going to be the foundation of this sort of a protocol. But I think then there are some additional tools that we can potentially use to go beyond the optimization of the pillars of health.
Mm-hmm.
And I know you've got a client that you're working with as well as sort of a beta tester for this program.
Yeah. It's right now the results all subjective, but she's very happy. She seems much more clear coming in to talk.
And she
to
came
me.
in this case with a little bit of what appeared to be early
Yeah.
decline, right?
Yeah. She's, I she was a 2-3 on the ApoE.
3-4?
Or I'm sorry, yeah, 3-4. Yeah, she was a 3-4.
Yeah, so a carrier of ApoE4.
And, siblings with dementia, parents, that kind of thing. So she's extremely worried about it, and rightfully, and I shared that with her for my own reasons, obviously. But, and we kind of started her, I told her about what we were doing, and I said, we're just going to throw you through this kind of preliminary deal. And so we work with her really closely, and she's really responding well with all the things that we've talked about incorporating into this whole plan. So pretty excited. We're layering on some other action items now too. And I'm looking forward to later this fall, probably doing some imaging and cognitive tests.
Yeah.
So
awesome. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, maybe what we can do, so we've talked about the genetic risk. So I would say people who are ApoE4 carriers or ApoE4 homozygotes are good candidates for this sort of a program. But certainly that's not the only people who develop dementia. I would say people who have risk of vascular dementia, right, or a history of vascular disease potentially could be good candidates for the program.
Yeah.
And then people who have multiple rounds of brain injury, I would say as well. And then as you suggested, Erik, certainly people who are just generally concerned about their cognitive function. But again, for me, I think the best opportunity to actually show outcomes are going to be in people who are really at a high risk and potentially already on the path.
Who have a clear need for it.
Absolutely.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah.
Yep.
So maybe, it'd be a good thing to talk about the kinds of, we've talked a little bit about the kinds of diagnostics. So I think it's worth doing a little bit of a deeper dive there. And again, I think we should, sort of my view in life in general, and with this program as well, is we should share what we're thinking, what we're doing, make it a conversation. I think, again, the more opportunities we have to get information out there for people, the better. So, we talked about the blood work. You mentioned the specific markers for plaques and dementia that are now available through LabCorp. I don't know if Quest has the same blood test. But
I'm assuming that if they don't, they will
ones.
soon.
Yeah.
They
So
do.
the NFL, the phospho-tau, ATN is, I think, the combo blood test.
Yeah.
The ATN profile.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right. So and then I think the metabolic panel. Of course, we talked about how dementia is certainly exacerbated by metabolic disease, and there's likely a causal component there. So all of the standard sort of metabolic stuff we typically measure in our other programs, insulin, glucose, A1C,
inflammatory markers.
So certainly dementia is an inflammatory condition.
Homocysteine, CRP, LPPLA2.
Yep.
And those are all measures of inflammation, but all kind of a little bit different. So homocysteine is a very widespread biomarker that affects multiple systems, detoxification, hormones, cardiovascular inflammation. And then obviously if there's cardiovascular inflammation risk, there's going to be a neurological vascular inflammation risk. And then so CRP is, as well, is a very widespread kind of, if you have a heavy exercise session the day before, your inflammation levels will be high, measured by CRP. But that's also a nice measure. If somebody did not work out for a week and their CRP is 4, then there's some underlying inflammation.
Yep. And for people who are interested, we had an episode not too long ago with Kevin and our medical director, Nikki Byrne, where we actually talked about a lot of these blood tests in more detail.
Awesome.
So refer people to that. And we'll put a link to the blood panels. But yeah, inflammation for sure. And you mentioned hormones there. That's another one I don't want to miss, because I think for a lot of people, who are in their 50s, 60s, maybe even 70s, there is a hormonal component to cognitive function as well. And some people might actually think that they're developing dementia when really it's a hormonal imbalance, and you fix the hormones and all of a sudden the brain fog clears. So that's a core part of the program and the blood panels as well. Heavy metals you mentioned before. So again, mercury poisoning symptoms can overlap with dementia. So some people who have cognitive decline might actually have toxins, right? And the strategy to address that is going to be potentially different than the strategy for somebody who is truly on the path to dementia because of a genetic predisposition whatever.
Yeah, the toxins piece is super important. I think it's rather a rabbit hole.
Mm-hmm.
I almost think it, as soon as I say toxins, I almost kind of say, oh, I don't want to go into the rabbit hole. But I have a patient actually, or we do at Human Sync, that did a total tox burden test. You ever heard of that?
Mm-hmm.
Through Vibrant. And heavy metals, mold, forever chemicals known as PFAS. I don't know if they do pesticides in that as well, but it's the most comprehensive toxin test that I've seen out there. Instead of doing 4 different tests, you just do this one urine screen. It's really, really nice. Levels were through the roof on almost all of it. And it came down to the likely culprits were the well water. This individual lives actually in northern Minnesota.
Mm.
There's a big coal, like it's like a iron mining, the Iron Range. I live in the Iron Range right now on well water. So I'm curious. I haven't gotten my well water tested. But after doing research, there's a ton of junk that can be in well water, not in all well water, but it can be, as well as the particulates coming over from the smoke and the fires in Canada.
Right.
So Ontario is on fire all the time. And a lot of those particulates are affecting the air quality index in northern Minnesota. And I looked into that, and there's forever chemicals. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on there.
Yeah.
So I'm bringing this back to brain health. If somebody has the Alzheimer's gene, and they have these toxins going on, they have to be
They may be
addressed.
more sensitized.
Don't have the resilience.
Well, and I think, what you just mentioned is important because that's probably, my guess, that's probably going to be a minor fraction of the people who develop dementia. It's toxin driven. I'm just going to use that as a catch-all term. And yet for those people, that's very addressessable. And so but you're not going to know who fits in which bucket unless you actually measure it, right? And that's the whole point of doing these diagnostics, right? Because not everybody is having the same causal risk factors that's driving their progression, but you're not going to know until you look at the person as an individual.
You have to have the time. That's why the program we're putting together it's not designed to scale to 50,000 people. We have to have the time to think about our patients.
Yeah.
We have to have the time to test. If you do 7 different tests, that's a lot of work internally.
Yeah.
That's why we're trying to limit it to just like
it's not designed to scale to 50,000 or 500,000 or 5 million people today. But I think it absolutely lays the groundwork. So
100%.
I think that's really important to assess.
Very good.
Address. So toxins is another bucket for sure. What am I missing? Vitamins and nutrients, right? So again, I think, there are, and we'll talk a little bit about supplements, but there are some that we can measure that are, again, probably important for dementia. Vitamin D, omega-3, right? Where we know what the optimal range is, and we know these things are, at least in human studies, highly correlated with cognitive function and dementia. And so we can measure, supplement as needed to get people into the optimal range.
Yep.
Am I missing anything else on the blood work? Big categories?
Vascular. I mean, we didn't talk about cholesterol a whole lot. That's a whole separate, like ApoB and your standard lipid panel that most people get at the doctor. Making sure the vascular environment is as healthy as possible.
Right.
Checking the dangerous cholesterol particles, ApoB, looking at Lp(a) as well. Lipoprotein A. That's an independent risk factor for heart disease, which I would like to think it probably damages the brain arteries as well.
And certainly if you have impaired circulatory function, that's going to increase your risk of dementia, right?
And really diving into insulin resistance, like you'd mentioned before, the whole diabetes type 3 kind of thing. You're essentially starving the brain.
So in many ways, there is a very, very large overlap with, the healthspan medicine sort of comprehensive panel, right?
Sure.
Because anything you can do to improve your health span or your rate of biological aging, for lack of a better way of saying it, is going to have a positive impact on your risk of dementia.
Yeah.
But there are these sort of unique features to dementia as well that deserve a deeper dive.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's the comprehensive blood work. And I think, anything related to metabolic health, so body composition is going to be a part of this because that's very important for metabolic health. So again, higher visceral adipose, higher inflammation, higher risk of dementia, lower lean mass, lower metabolic control, higher risk of dementia. So paying attention to that. And then on the imaging side, you mentioned brain MRI. That's going to be a core part of this, both for assessing where people are at and monitoring disease progression and hopefully reversal of disease progression. And so this is an area where I'm really intrigued because there are multiple studies now showing that, at least in some people, you can reverse the brain volume loss, at least to some extent, through either lifestyle modifications or pharmacologically, potentially with things like rapamycin. That's very intriguing to me, and I think being able to actually measure that in the same individual longitudinally is very powerful.
Yeah. I get very excited when you talk like that because I don't want to find somebody with low hippocampal tissue because that's sad for that person. I don't want them to go through that.
Well, especially if there's nothing you can do. But now there's exciting.
But now I almost want to find it because I think we can do something, and I can't imagine redoing another test 6 to 12 months later and showing that we grew brain tissue. That's pretty crazy.
Yeah. So I think that will be a really important part of this program, and the nice thing is as well that the tools are out there now to do this very quantitatively. So
we're not just shooting in the dark here.
Right.
We are very calculative on how we are recommending these kind of advanced therapies.
Yeah, my patient has some low hippocampal volume a little bit. So
it'll be super interesting to see,
totally
3 months, 6 months from now, if there's been any positive change there. Fingers crossed for her, for sure. And then I think the other piece is the quantitative assessments of cognitive function, right? So the cognitive testing that is possible now. So you mentioned the MoCA. That's a useful test, I think, for people who are fairly far along in the disease progression. It's not very sensitive for early stages of the disease. So there are tools now available that we can use to get a much earlier picture of cognitive function for where somebody's at now, benchmark it to at least age matched normal ranges, right? And then look at progression over time. I think the longitudinal pieces are going to be more informative because there's a lot of variation, right?
Yeah.
If you take a population of 50-year-olds, this is what I was getting at earlier. Somebody who starts in a very high functioning state, you might not actually see the decline until that person has had pretty significant disease progression. But if you measure that same person over time, you'll be able to detect it much earlier.
Should we briefly talk about the stages before diagnosed Alzheimer's?
Sure.
Just for, I mean, you've got normal operating status. You're just walking around the world and everything is good. And sometimes people start to feel a little brain fog or something's a little bit off. So the first step in that, I think, progression, if somebody's curious if they're progressing towards the diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease, is subjective cognitive impairment. So they call it SCI.
Yeah.
Right.
Also probably worth saying, I mean, we've sort of used the terms Alzheimer's disease and dementia interchangeably. And I mean, Alzheimer's disease is a very specific type of dementia.
Correct.
And I think it's a little bit unknown to what extent are the underlying mechanistic causes of Alzheimer's disease and other types of dementia shared. My view is obviously it's going to be both, right? There's going to be things that are specific to Alzheimer's, things that are specific to, frontotemporal dementias, things that are specific to Parkinson's disease. But my guess is there is an underlying shared similarity. And so, again, it's a little bit of a hypothesis, but I don't think it's a big stretch to think that a lot of the approaches that we're talking about are going to be shared across different types of age-related dementias and traumatic brain injury, and potentially even environmental induced. So I'm putting toxins and stuff like that. Brain diseases.
Because we're still treating the brain. Everybody's brain was designed the same way, just it's been altered a little bit throughout. So and I think some of this also is which specific regions of the brain or types of neurons are most sensitized to that insult, right? So like Parkinson's disease, very specific type of neurons. That's why you get the phenotypic presentation that you do. But some of the underlying mechanisms leading to that neuron death are probably going to be shared across multiple types of dementia. And we don't need to go crazy in depth on this, but subjective cognitive impairment are like the beginning stages. And then there's mild cognitive impairment, which is MCI. And then there's the diagnosis.
Right.
So there's a couple steps before the diagnosis. I think the couple steps before is the sweet spot.
Mm-hmm.
If we get somebody with the diagnosis, rock on, we will do everything we can to reverse it. That's super exciting too. But
Right.
I think to be able, like just with the case study I talked about with the lady from Kentucky, 63 years old with the worst Alzheimer's gene you can get, if we can keep her where she's at for the rest of her life.
Right.
That'd be incredible.
And you can pick that up with testing. Somebody may think they have SCI or they may not, or they do. And you can pick that up with, some sensitive testing to kind of really, flash a red light and say, hey, we need to pay attention here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've sort of danced around it a little bit and talked about some of the things we can do. But maybe it's worth going into a little bit. So we talked about what are we going to measure, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then what can we do to help people maintain or improve their cognitive health going forward. So talked about lifestyle. I don't know that we need to spend a lot of time doing a deep dive on, how you address diet, exercise, sleep quality, relationship, human connection, connectedness. Other than to say, I think one of the things that makes this project, this collaboration, very unique is that we all have expertise in this space. And at Optispan, a lot of what we do, our foundation are the pillars of health. At HumanSync, your foundation is around the lifestyle factors and optimizing those.
We call them the foundations of health.
The foundations of health, right? We've got a group here that, has been at the cutting edge of how do we look at the individual, identify for them what are the strategies going to be that's going to give them the biggest bang for the buck in terms of what they can do around those pillars of healthspan, and then using coaching approaches, other approaches to enable them to do that. I think one of the things that excites me about this program is I think the people who come into this program are going to be exceptionally motivated to lean into the lifestyle approaches.
Yes.
So I think in some ways it's going to be a patient population that has the opportunity to see very large effects because they're going to be exceptionally motivated to lean into their personal health optimization plans.
Which makes it good for everybody involved.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. So there's the lifestyle piece, nutrition. There will be some personalization there, but a lot of it is about, getting away from the processed foods and the simple sugars and establishing metabolic health, better body composition. Same thing with exercise, both cardiovascular fitness and resistance training.
Mm-hmm.
Sleep quality, you guys want to say anything about that? I mean, we all know it's super important.
Yeah.
Again, that's a thing that can exacerbate risk for dementia.
Sure. Yeah, huge. Like for Our Lady that we just keep referring to these examples, but she was not sleeping very well. She was very stressed out about other things. One thing being just watching the news. And I put her on a news. I put her on
a lot of anxiety from watching the news.
And shared by a lot of people, and she'd verbalize that, and we just joke about things. But I put her on a news fast for a while.
Yeah.
And now we've got her, okay, you're limited to this amount.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And that's it. And
I think that's a really nice example of personalization, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Because not everybody falls in that bucket. But like you said, there are a lot of people who, because of the world we live in, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're whether it's your Instagram feed or watching the news or, whatever, you're getting exposed to these signals that are creating internal stress.
Mm-hmm.
And again, if you are genetically at high risk for dementia and you're experiencing a lot of chronic stress, those things are going to synergize to drive your risk or your progression of the disease. And so if you can identify, there's this, environmental trigger that's driving the stress.
Yeah.
In this case, just take it out. Right.
And it's, we call that the fingerprint of the patient, and it takes a little while to get that. And she didn't even realize that would be what would be causing her an issue.
Right. Exactly.
So, and she wasn't sleeping well, and we just talked about what her day was like, how things were going, and we're able to uncover that.
Right.
So we've really kind of dialed in her sleep.
This really, again, I think it's worth double clicking, makes the point, right? So you can see from the tests, you see from the blood test, cortisol's high, whatever.
Yeah.
So you can see that there is a likely chronic stress component here.
Sure.
But unless you actually talk to that person, understand what's going on in their life, you're not going to be able to identify the source of that stress.
And what's interesting is So I've been involved in 5 businesses in this space since 2018. 3 clinics, one business-to-business product, and then a telemedicine company. And I've seen different techniques on how you get this fingerprint. I love that you call it the fingerprint.
Yeah.
Because you can send a questionnaire, and you can get some information, but then somebody has to think of what the questions are in that questionnaire and they send it. And that's just kind of what one or a team of people, maybe there's a medical group that says, this is our medical intake questionnaire. But you miss information. And I rewind all the way back to 2019 when I entered this space. I used to see like 6 different doctors talk to a patient.
Mm-hmm.
I was a health coach. Mm-hmm. And my job was to get the reports, put them together, and I would listen to the doctor talk to the patient, and it was just like magic. So it was an hour-long conversation, and you get to the stuff of like watching the news, and the information that was pulled out was just gold. Mm-hmm. Then the company scales, and they say, we don't have the time to do that. We're going to send a questionnaire. Mm. And at that point, quality of care went down internally. Yeah. So it's so important to sit and talk to the patient, and the stress and sleep. Maybe just a second, if you don't mind, I'll talk about Human Sync. We use wearables, and so we use the Whoop strap. There's a medical grade, a newer version. Mm-hmm. I don't know if it's perfect. I don't think it is perfect, but they get better and better and better with all these upgrades. This battery life is incredible. Yeah. You can do an EKG snapshot, blood pressure insights. I don't think it's as accurate as a cuff, but we don't have to go into that. But all patients that sign up at Human Sync, and I think in the brain program, we're going to have wearables on these people. So the coach can monitor what's going on with deep sleep, what's going on with REM sleep. What does HRV look like? Mm-hmm. What does a resting heart rate look like? If resting heart rate's, in the 70s, and that's a big problem, we want to get that below 60. So I'm seeing, and I've seen this for a long time. I've worked with a lot of patients over the years, and especially at Human Sync, almost everybody's stressed out and sleeping bad. The news, world stuff. I think humans are living in a world today that I don't think we're designed to live in this as much. That's why you guys went hiking yesterday, and you probably love getting outside in nature. Mm-hmm. People need to do more of that. But I think it's extremely difficult to improve people's health when they're suffering from stress, so much so that we've actually started this project at Human Sync. We call it the block. We're developing blocks internally, which is if somebody comes into our program and has poor sleep, poor recovery, they're pushing it too much, which happens to be about 90% of people that come to us. They enter this first phase, which is block 1, which is nervous system recovery. Right. And the data we're using is resting heart rate, HRV. We do cortisol and DHEA. We do the cortisol curve throughout the day. So we got like 6 or 7 data points that tells us there's major stress going on with this person. And then that person asks us if they can do, they come to us, they listen to podcasts, they want to do stem cells. They want to do peptides. Yeah. And I talk to them about peptides, and I'm like, okay, let's not talk about that now, because it doesn't really matter if you're sleeping for 5 hours or 4 hours per night and going to bed at 1 a.m. every morning, waking up and working a 16-hour day. Yeah. It's just impossible. So it's almost frustrating, but at the same time, I'm not frustrated at the individual. It's just...
There's a lot of noise out there.
There's a lot of noise
that
out
get
there.
people focusing on the wrong things, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. The only thing I would tweak about what you said, I agree completely. The only thing I would tweak about the wearables is we'll use wearables on everybody except those people where that actually creates more stress. Because there are a small subset of people who, if they're wearing their Whoop or their Oura Ring, their sleep actually declines because they're worried about their number that they're going to see. So again, this gets back to the individual, right? And just making sure that for each person, the strategy that's being taken is. But the wearables are hugely valuable.
Mm-hmm. For the right person.
For most people, I would say. Or some wearables are like some people, a continuous glucose monitor is great, but an Oura Ring causes them stress. So personalizing even that piece of it, I think, is just important to mention. Okay, so we talked about lifestyle. That's obviously going to be the foundation with everyone. But there are things, I believe, now that you can do beyond just lifestyle to give people the best opportunity to prevent progression or potentially even reverse the cognitive decline. So let's talk about supplements first. As you guys know, I'm pretty skeptical of the supplement industry. I think it is extremely corrupt. And yet there are some supplements where there's reasonably good data. Yeah. We talked about already omega-3 and vitamin D. Let's talk about what else goes in the bucket that we feel pretty confident for the right person, or maybe for everyone. The potential benefit greatly outweighs any risk of adding it to the mix.
That's a good point. Yeah, the benefit outweighs any real risk. I would say adequate B vitamins, and we've been talking about taking control of the specific supplements we give to patients, so we know that they're third party, evaluated, and we know exactly what we're getting with that.
Huge.
Yeah.
And when you talk about the potential risk, that is one of the risks, is if you're just buying a bunch of supplements off Amazon, you don't necessarily know what the quality is. Does it have the active ingredient at the level it's supposed to have, and what impurities might be in there, right? So making sure that you've got a good source for the supplements helps alleviate some of that concern that goes along. If you're taking 20 different supplements, those impurities can certainly add up.
Yeah. I think adding... So you're talking about B vitamins. I think about homocysteine. We talked about this biomarker before, and methylation. We do also check MTHFR on our genetic panel.
Risk.
So kind of backing up to genetics, we do ApoE. We do a genetic panel screening, and amongst those genes is MTHFR, which is the mother effer gene everybody talks about, but it has a big implication on how our body detoxes toxins. Our cardiovascular health, kind of going back to what I said in the beginning, but B vitamins are part of the picture, and then there's trimethylglycine as well. So TMG with B vitamins is critical, I think, for brain health, and homocysteine, and then also magnesium.
I agree with you, and I think you mentioned magnesium as well, right?
Yeah.
Magnesium 3 and 8. I think you have
L3 and A crosses the blood-brain barrier. All that.
I think the challenge there is that's when you can't really measure, right? So it's a little bit of a guess, but the downside is pretty minimal other than cost, right?
I think it's important to check the electrolytes too, because calcium competes with magnesium. So if you're over supplementing with magnesium, you want to make sure you're still staying on top of blood work to make sure all the electrolyte panel and the CMP stays balanced.
Creatine?
Great.
Where do you guys stand on creatine?
100%.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, so that probably everybody would be my view.
There's been recent, I don't want to go too deep on this, but recent discussions about high dose.
Yeah, like when you say high dose, you mean like 10 grams instead of 5?
Rhonda Patrick had somebody on that's saying 20.
Yeah.
So I just think that's interesting.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I personally have upped my creatine from 5 to 10.
Me too.
Me too. And so I think, my feeling right now is that the evidence supporting even higher doses is minimal at this point. Doesn't mean it's wrong, doesn't mean it's right. It's just minimal. And there are some people that, develop gastrointestinal upset when you increase the dose. So again, matching that to the person. But I think as a baseline, 5 or 10 grams a day of creatine makes sense for everyone. Risk very, very low, if there's any. And potential benefit, it's not gonna cure Alzheimer's disease, but it, as part of an overall strategy based around lifestyle, potentially, can help. Yeah.
And what we're looking at is, kind of what made me just think about this when you were talking, is all the supplements we're talking about so far, which is omega, vitamin D, B vitamins, TMG, magnesium, creatine, all have multi-system impacts.
Right.
It's not just targeting one specific little thing.
Right.
It's like, what supplements can we recommend that have many different effects?
Right. Yeah. Anything else that you'd put in the very high confidence bucket?
As far as treatments or supplements, no, not me. No.
Yeah, the curious, fascinating section would be like lion's mane, but you can't measure it. Lion's mane is a mushroom that can be obviously consumed or put into a supplement that has been shown in rodents, maybe mice. You know more about this than I do, to help increase levels of BDNF, which is like fertilizer for the brain.
Right.
So I would like to think it's a natural. I mean, if you go eat a lion's mane mushroom, I'd like to think it's beneficial, but there's no way of testing to see if it's shown.
There's no downside.
Yeah.
There.
Well, isn't there? I mean, again, this is where I get, I think my personal view is once you get outside of the things you're really confident in, then the downside becomes, first of all, you don't know for sure that it's zero, but lots of people have been taking it, so it's probably not a big risk of side effects, other than the more things you take, the more likelihood of interactions. And this impurities thing that we were talking about, like even if you have the highest quality manufacturing, right, every supplement you take is going to have other stuff in there that's not the active ingredient. And as we're learning with microplastics, sometimes we find out 10 years down the road that some additive actually is accumulating in our body. So that would be my only sort of hesitation to say, let's just throw everything that might work at people, right? Aside from the fact then they have to, remember to take 50 different supplements. Although maybe the act of trying to remember to take all your supplements would actually, it's like the cognitive games you're playing.
That's a cognitive game right there. Yeah.
So, I think there's a lot of things in the intriguing category that maybe for some people, or maybe if they really feel like they get benefit from it, like I would put calcium alpha ketoglutarate in there. I would put NAD precursors in there.
Alpha GPC and like choline, phosphatidylcholine.
Yeah, I think there's a bunch of stuff. Urolithin A. There's a bunch of stuff that, might. And I think some of these things have plausible biological mechanisms.
Yeah.
Difficult to measure.
Yeah.
It's hard to come out of the gate and look at all the data and be like, this person needs line.
Well, but here's the thing, like where I think with the NAD precursors, right, there's reasonable, it's not great, but there's reasonable early evidence for Parkinson's disease with NAD precursors. And so if somebody seems to have a Parkinson's disease like phenotype or evidence of mitochondrial dysfunction, that would be a place. And you can measure NAD. So, if they're deficient in NAD or their NAD to NADH ratio is off or their lactate is off, like that might be somebody where it makes sense to try an NAD precursor. See if you can correct it. See if you get the beauty is because we're going to be measuring longitudinally, we should be able to know in 3 months if the protocol is having the desired effect. Yes. So I think there will be some personalization around some of these other supplements, but also useful for people to understand, like the core set is pretty minimal of supplements that this group feels high confidence for this particular use case. So then supplements we talked about. So let's talk about medications, and then let's talk about non-medical interventions that we might think about for the right people. So pharmacological interventions. So easy button, I think, would be people who have, high lipid profiles. You could probably use the standard sort of lipid-lowering medications, statins, PCSK9 inhibitor.
Right.
But I think very helpful to run a pharmacogenomics panel on these individuals, though, first. So we found that super, super helpful at Human Sync. If somebody comes in, perfect example, a guy came in with 10 years of anxiety, age 30, runs a $900 million company. I'm assuming a lot of the anxiety comes from that.
Sure.
But he was on 3 medications. We ran a PGX test. Through, I can't remember the name of the company, but it came back and it's red, yellow, green reporting. 3 of the medications that he was taking, 2 of them were in red, 1 is yellow. So those are not breaking down in his body's not metabolizing those. So that's if somebody comes in and they're on medications, I think running a PGX.
And so what do you do in that case?
Was this the Genomind?
It gives you a report on what medications would fit the person better.
But what do you do if you try to find an alternative medication that will have the same effect?
Yeah.
Was this the Genomind test? Am I thinking about the same thing?
Well, True Diagnostics does have a PGX test. We don't use that one.
Right.
But there's another company. I can't remember the name of the company right now. But very, very, very helpful.
We did a similar thing with a guy who's in his late 40s. He was on an SSRI by his psychiatrist, and he was not metabolizing it correctly. He was getting just super anxious and not sleeping, really anxious, and really out of character for this guy. And we did some of those testing, and he was not a candidate for the drug he was on. So we switched, problem solved.
Yeah, it can say, don't do this statin, try this one instead. Don't do this blood pressure medication, do this one instead.
Yeah.
Game changer.
Yeah. So again, you mentioned blood pressure. That's I kind of put statins, blood pressure in the standard bucket because you do that regardless of whether somebody's in the brain health sort of program. But important to mention, those are things you want to look at. Same thing with metabolic diabetes drugs, right? So metformin, SGLT2 inhibitors. SGLT2 inhibitors are interesting. So this is one where, if somebody is mildly metabolically perturbed, I would be inclined to at least have that conversation and think about an SGLT2 inhibitor to kind of optimize metabolic state, given that there's, the evidence admittedly in animal studies for longevity benefits, and some evidence in humans for benefits for kidney function or other conditions, right? So I don't know what you guys think about that, but those would be the kind of drugs that I would think about on in one by one case as potentially protective for dementia, even if, we don't have the randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trials. Yeah.
Education is pretty key on that too, right? Use it as a tool, while at the same time adjusting lifestyle and then
absolutely
making sure.
None of this is a substitute for lifestyle.
Yeah.
I think that's super important to communicate to people.
But yeah, your point of, SGLT2 inhibitors and all that sort of stuff is, if you want to put the gas pedal on dementia or aging in general, you just run high glucose all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
Or insulin resistance in particular, which is downstream of high
Correct.
glucose.
Yeah.
Where do you guys stand on metformin? Do you think metformin is a good candidate for off-label use for dementia?
And the right people.
So who would be right for metformin and not an SGLT2 inhibitor? I guess is the question I come back to.
I would say
That's a good question.
Yeah, if you've got early, frankly, I'd probably rather start with an SGLT2 inhibitor prior to metformin in somebody who's early insulin resistance or has a, A1C that's running high or they're,
I suppose if they experience side effects on the SGLT2 inhibitor, maybe are prone to urinary tract
UTIs.
infections. Yeah. But outside of that, I sort of feel like the SGLT2 inhibitors are, at least from my view, a better bet, given that they clearly have longevity benefits, again, in animal studies, but humans are animals, so it means something.
What about acarbose?
Yeah, acarbose is interesting. I think that's a hard one because a lot of people experience the gastrointestinal upsets. And again, maybe it's worth just taking people through this. So SGLT2 inhibitors and acarbose are sort of interesting comparisons because what acarbose is going to do is it's going to inhibit the breakdown of complex carbohydrates. So in some ways, reduce how fast your glucose is being taken up into your bloodstream. Depending on the diet that you're eating. That's the other thing that's important to appreciate. Whereas SGLT2 inhibitors are sort of at the other end of the spectrum where they just cause you to pee out more glucose.
Got it.
I don't know of any data combining them. I'd be a little worried about that because you might actually push blood glucose too low.
Yeah.
But again, my gut reaction is that I'd probably think about an SGLT2 inhibitor, certainly for myself, before I would try acarbose.
There's more evidence that I've found around the SGLT2 inhibitors, even when it comes to vascular disease.
Well, certainly more widely used at least in Western countries in America. Okay, so things that improve metabolic health, broadly speaking, yes, for the right people, but that might be a large fraction of the population. And SGLT2 inhibitors, it seems like rising to the top there, at least right now. Rapamycin. You guys know where I stand.
Have you heard of rapamycin?
It's come across my radar once or twice.
I'll just share a personal. Back in 2020 or something, I think I heard you on a podcast talk about it, and I walked out. And my eyes were crossed. I told my wife, "I'm like, this is really interesting, but I have no idea what he's talking about." And
I get that a lot.
But not because of the way you explained it. Because it was like, okay, you've got a bacteria and Easter Island, liver transplant. It was just a total that and mTOR. When I first learned and heard you talk about it, I was kind of like, well, it's going to take a couple years to understand what this is, but sorry to steal the show there.
Well, it's interesting from my perspective how rapamycin has gone from nobody's heard of it outside of the biology of aging field, right, to now, it's sort of become the darling of the longevity, pharmaceutical realm. But I think in the context of dementia, there's a ton of evidence, and it just keeps accumulating that at least in animal models, it always works. And in some people, there's, I think, accumulating evidence for benefits, both functionally and at the level of like brain volume, right?
Yeah. So when you say in animals, this is something that I found very fascinating, is your history testing interventions and how they work in animals, right? You got yeast and fruit flies and mice. Rapamycin seems to have positive effects on
Everywhere it's been tested, as far as I know.
And little other interventions like supplements we mentioned may affect one, but not the other.
Yeah. Or they're not reproducible, right? Or one lab says it works, another lab says it doesn't, and you're kind of like, what? Okay. You know? Whereas, as far as I know, again, rapamycin has been reproduced by like at least a dozen labs in mice, right? Which is almost unheard of for anything other than caloric restriction. But I think for the dementia piece, it's also been shown in multiple animal models of a variety of different types of dementia, as well as cognitive, normal aging cognitive decline. And then you pair that with the early, but again, I think intriguing data on brain volume and functional effects in people who are at risk for dementia. So like ApoE3/4 carriers. So to my mind, again, I'm not saying everybody in the program is going to get rapamycin. I think there are some people who might not tolerate it. They might not want the mouth sores. But to my mind, I think anybody I knew personally who was at high risk or had mild cognitive impairment, I'd be like, you really, really, really ought to think about it.
Yeah, I think the upside really outweighs. For sure. Yeah. Especially that small study that we've talked about before with, I don't know how many, very small. But the findings, the imaging done pre and post was pretty dramatic.
And cerebral blood flow as well. Two studies, I think, now have shown improvements in cerebral blood flow. Which brings me to, so again, I think rapamycin will be talked about with probably everybody in the program, put it that way.
Is it reducing inflammation? Is it?
Yes.
And mTOR? So mTOR? So
it inhibits mTOR, and then downstream of mTOR complex 1, there are a bunch of processes. Autophagy is probably important. Mitochondrial function is probably important, but also the effects on chronic inflammation, right? So direct effects of rapamycin on T cells, for example.
Same concept as a supplement we were talking about earlier. Supplement to affect multiple systems or processes. Rapamycin is like the Mac Daddy for that.
Yeah, I mean, it has a very specific biochemical. It is very clean from a biochemical perspective. As far as we know, it only affects mTOR complex 1 biochemically, but the downstream consequences are multiple, and probably multiple downstream processes are involved in both normal aging and age-related dementias. Interesting, yet still not, as far as I know, not a lot of data. There's intriguing data in animal models, but I don't know of any in humans. Maybe it's out there for TBI and rapamycin. So that's a place where it's a bit speculative to think about giving people who've had TBI rapamycin. I personally, and I've talked about this for a decade plus, think it's very likely that rapamycin can have benefits. It's interesting to think about when you would use it compared to the injury itself, but that's probably a different conversation for a different day. A lot of intriguing biology there where you could see opportunities for a course of rapamycin, maybe even, very, very close in time after the brain injury itself. You do like a 6-week, 12-week course, and then that might help with the initial sort of response to the brain injury. But
curious, would you want to, this is kind of getting sciencey, but there's an inflammatory process that takes place initially after the injury.
Yeah, exactly.
Would you want to do it right then, or would you want to let the body do a little inflammation and then like on day 2 or 3? That's probably to be determined still. But
again, it's totally speculative. Yeah. My intuition is you probably want to blunt that. It's probably that initial inflammatory response that leads to some of the negative long-term
damage afterwards.
But there's data on this in mice, which it looks really compelling. But as far as I know, people haven't really followed up clinically yet. So, anyways, rapamycin, a candidate for a lot of people in the program. Where I was going though, I touched on the cerebral blood flow. What about PDE5 inhibitors? Cialis.
Oh, yeah, low risk, low dose
Cialis, or other PDE5 inhibitors.
Absolutely,
and we know blood flow is important,
right?
Yeah, it brings oxygen to the tissues. It brings other things to the tissues.
So again, I think that's something that, depending on the person, the situation. Both men and women, it's worth saying, Cialis will have the same effect on blood flow in both men and women. The consequences of that are a little bit different.
Yep. What about low dose naltrexone?
Yeah, so that's the other one that I was going to talk about. Yeah. So a lot of intriguing evidence there. Again, I'm a little bit less confident on LDN than I am on those other 3. I don't know about you guys and where you land.
From an inflammatory standpoint, yeah, I'm really optimistic on that. That's really profound stuff that I've seen.
Yep. Inflammation, immune function, immune modulation. There's an immune component to brain disease and, neurodegeneration. So, I always back up and think safety first. Like, do we know it's safe? And then if the answer is yes, and there's a risk of getting Alzheimer's disease, then I would say the answer would be yes for LDN.
Yeah.
In the right situation.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, the other one, GLP-1 agonists, right? I think that's another one where certainly, again, I think for people who are obese in the program with early metabolic perturbations, that's kind of a no-brainer. Mm-hmm. Again, if they want it and if it makes sense given everything else that they've got going on. But then the question, and we touched on this yesterday, I think, Kevin, is, what about for other people? Should we think about low-dose GLP-1s for some people who aren't overweight? I think it's interesting. I don't know the answer yet, but I'm intrigued because they potentially have anti-inflammatory effects.
In the brain, yep.
Mm-hmm. We've had a couple patients microdose GLPs in the small subset. No major changes that were observable, but I would think...
biomarkers, you mean? In like blood-based
biomarkers and subjectively, nothing, but it wasn't a long dose. I mean, the duration was not long. It's probably 6 months, 8 months or something like that.
That's pretty good. Yeah. So again, I mean, I don't want to give the impression that, everybody in the program is going to get all these drugs, right? Because that's not going to be the case. But I think these are the tools that, to me, kind of like with the supplements, are the most likely, given what we know now, to move the needle for some people. And it's going to be a matter of figuring out for that individual which of these is the right options, and then measuring longitudinally to see. Right?
When we first drew this thing up, you had a good idea of putting it into levels or layers for the intervention. So I don't know, maybe call it level 1 is lifestyle, diet, exercise, sleep, stress, make sure people are not following the standard American way of life. And then the select supplements we talked about that are non-negotiables, that's all level 1 coaching, right? And then level 2, would you say is rapamycin, LDN, some of these medications?
Yeah, I think so. Again, I think that's a reasonable way to frame it. Again, I think those are things that we would talk about with everyone, find out where they're at, look at their entire, profile, biomarkers, genetics, and then try to identify for each person among the menu options that the levers we can pull. We know for everyone, diet, exercise, sleep, relationships, stress level, going to try to dial that in for everyone, right? Then when we get beyond that, there's some of the supplements that, sure, it makes sense to, again, unless somebody just really doesn't want to take creatine or they have a bad, upset stomach from it, put everyone on creatine and the other D and other supplements. But yeah, then we get to the pharmaceuticals, and I would guess there's not a single pharmaceutical that everyone in the program is going to.
No, that's got to be customized. So what's level 3?
Well, again, I don't know that I would put it level 3 as in it's more or less likely to be used, but I would certainly say sort of the same approach around non-pharmaceutical interventions, which I would put, therapeutic plasma exchange as an example there, where, again, the data is interesting. I personally think it's likely that for many people who are on the path to dementia, that therapeutic plasma exchange can have a, small to moderate beneficial effect. So that I would put in the bucket of, talk to people. That is expensive. So again, it's also going to depend on, what people's economic situation is, how much they're willing to spend. But that's an intervention where I think for some people, it makes sense.
If there's levels of inflammation, high toxins. So I think it's, from what I'm seeing, it's one of the best interventions out there to remove multiple different toxins. So forever chemicals, heavy metals, mold. I've seen this personally at 2 clinics in Florida, people with, I think they had Guillain-Barré that was exacerbated by mold. 2 or 3 TPE sessions, removed all symptoms. This person was bedridden. And the mold levels just significally dropped. The thing is, they got to redo the TPE at a certain time period.
But again, it also just makes sense, right? If you've got a lot of garbage in circulation, the therapeutic plasma exchange, as long as it's not part of the fraction that gets put back in, is going to be reduced, right? So it's extremely plausible that you can drop your circulating toxins by 60 to 80%. And then, like you said, you probably need to do multiple rounds depending on where the person's at to get it down.
Keep it at bay,
Exactly, And then on top of that, there's the potential for a parabiosis-like, anti-aging effect, right? From presumably diluting out inflammatory factors and then potentially other negative factors that accumulate with age.
Yep.
So
Yep.
that seems like that's definitely something that we will include in the program. Again, it's not going to be everyone that's the right therapeutic for. But I think
if the cost was like super reasonable, would you want everybody to get it?
I think anybody who's not,
Anybody
afraid of the procedure, doesn't have serious,
clotting factors, kidney problems,
yeah,
liver stuff.
right. But I think, I think the risk is really, really low. And for that particular patient population, the likelihood of benefit is reasonably high.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. There's always some risk, but
sure. But there is just getting an IV, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so therapeutic plasma exchange is sort of obvious. And that's, I don't know, can you guys think of anything else that you would put in that level of confidence? I mean, there are other experimental procedures we can talk about, but I mean, I don't know, for people who want to do sauna, cold plunge, like that kind of pedestrian stuff, sure. I don't personally think it's going to super move the needle for people, but it probably could help.
I put sauna in like level 1 to 2 just because of the detox and the sweat. I mean, it's good for people to sweat. It's good for the body to get things out. I don't think it's as effective as doing a session of TPE. I think some of the cardiovascular benefits of sauna seem to be interesting.
but then again, downside at all.
Not everybody has the finances or the ability to jump in a sauna every single day.
I would disagree with there's no downside at all. I mean, I think, like, I know a guy whose blood pressure dropped, he passed out in the sauna and he lost his arm. Right? So I'm not saying that's
rare.
likely to happen. It is rare. But again, it's useful to appreciate.
Go with a friend.
Yeah, right. Don't sauna alone.
Don't sauna alone.
That's quite the story. Never heard that one before. Interesting. I don't know about cold plunge. I think when patients ask us about cold plunge, I say, have you ever done it? And some people say yes, some people say no. And if they've done it and they felt a cognitive boost afterwards and it helped them maybe at work for the next 3 hours, then sweet. Yeah. Did you enjoy it? Does it motivate you to get out of bed in the morning to do a cold plunge? And then yes, rock on.
Yeah,
I don't think it's going to prevent Alzheimer's.
Yeah. No, I would agree with that completely. I think if people enjoy it, it's a good thing to do it.
Yeah.
I just am not super convinced that either of those are really going to move the needle in a big way.
Yeah. Not a core part of the plan. More the icing on the cake.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything else there? And then we can get into like you mentioned, stem cells. There's exosomes,
peptides.
What are the peptides you would think about for dementia?
When I think about brain health peptides, the ones that I've seen, I've never actually looked at data and said this person needs Cmax. But there's cerebrolysin, there's Cmax, and there's C-Lank.
I got to say, cerebrolysin is not a great name.
No.
You don't want to
slice your cerebrum.
Yeah, I think one's for anxiety. One claims to improve levels of BDNF. I don't know enough about it. A lot of patients have asked about it, though, because they listen to these podcasts.
I think, unfortunately, there's, in this space, maybe next to supplements, the most misinformation out there is around peptides. Yeah. And I would agree with you. I'm not aware of any peptide that is convincingly going to be likely to have benefits for people who are at high risk for dementia. Doesn't mean they don't exist. I'm not aware of anything where the data is actually very good. Yeah. And I hear a lot of speculation around, dementia is mitochondrial dysfunction. So these peptides that improve mitochondrial function, whatever that means, is going to be beneficial for dementia. And that's just, that's not a scientific...
And they're not even testing mitochondrial dysfunction.
So. Right. So it's not a scientific approach. But unfortunately, in the peptide space, you have a lot of people who are not scientific talking a lot and saying things that are not scientific. So.
Yeah. I think it's very hard clinically. Like if you look at a patient's plan, okay, let's say there's a call coming up in 2 weeks and you look, okay, you got so-and-so, they're on a peptide. At some point, so this is what you do with medications and supplements and the current plan. You always have to review what plan they're on, talk to them, have the call. Is this plan working? Is the data changing? Is there any safety problems? If somebody's on a peptide, it's almost impossible to do that because you can't say, they're on BPC 157, I'm going to check this biomarker, or I'm going to check this data point to see, is it actually working? Yeah. But there's a lot of subjective. So a lot of people love BPC 157. Sure. They feel like $1 million, but it's so hard to say and make that clinical recommendation on, yeah, I think you should stay on it or you should stop it, because there's no.
Yeah. Well, framework. And I think for some things, there's, I can see the rationale for BPC 157. Yeah. For example, if you have an injury, there is this perception with some data to back it up that it's a regenerative peptide, right? That it can improve injury recovery. Yeah. Try it. The downsides are likely low if it's manufactured properly and all of that stuff. And like you said, a lot of people feel like it improves their rate of healing and recovery. Great. Yeah. But yeah, it's hard to know for sure. Yeah. But again, for this particular program, I'm just not so I don't want to say I'm not going to say there's nothing to peptides. I mean, GLP-1 agonists are peptides, right? Obviously, they can have very potent biological activities. Yeah. And they can work. But it's really hard in the space to know what's real and what's not. And I just haven't seen anything that makes me convinced for cognitive function that there's any there to what people are saying.
I do love the peptides. I love BPC 157, TB, TB 500 and all that stuff. But you're right. It's you can't really measure stuff outside of it. But I have guys with completely subjective, awesome outcomes. But
yeah, and I've seen some blood work recently. Actually, a guy signed up. I think he was on TB 500. Yeah, BPC. He even did a SARM.
Yeah.
His blood work was beautiful. His kidney was great. Liver was great. Glucose, A1C was 5.1. Homocysteine was less than 8. Perfect cholesterol. Inflammation levels were super, super low. And he was on this stack for about 6 to 8 months or so.
And do you have before he went on the stack?
That's before.
I do not have before.
So again, who knows, right?
I don't have before. Yeah, because he came to us on it. Yeah. But I need to I don't even know if he had blood tested before.
Yeah. So anyways, I think at this point, so that I guess I would put that in the TBD bucket, right? If compelling data comes out, if we learn as we go that there is a compelling reason to incorporate a particular, a peptide outside of the GLP-1 agonist, then, we'll certainly do that. But right now, I don't think there's a lot to support that. And the same thing I would say with stem cells and exosomes, although that's for different reasons. I think the exosomes are just unregulated. Again, not a lot of great data yet. Although certainly, much like peptides, biological activity certainly can have benefits in the right context. I just don't know of anything right now that's really compelling for cognitive decline. And you've got the challenge around sourcing it, right? Yeah. Same thing with stem cells, even if the stem cell therapy was legal in the jurisdiction that you're in, where do you get them from that you actually trust the manufacturer to do it right? Yep. I just don't know the answer to that. Yep. Okay, anything else that we haven't talked about? So that's sort of where the program's at today. Hopefully we'll, put it all together into a final protocol in the next couple of weeks, and then be able to launch, I don't know, August, September time.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. There's a lot of deeper stuff we haven't talked about that we can't even get into, but but it's gonna.
We're looking for 100 people to start, 12-month program, everything included, except TPE. We're trying to figure that out right now because not everyone's going to get TPE, so there's some behind the scenes work.
Yeah, and that's a really high cost item
that changes the game.
Yeah.
We've got a couple locations, one in Oklahoma, one here at Optispan Clinic.
Seattle?
In Seattle, and then Human Sync is licensed in about 14 states. So as far as geographically, we've got in-person and remote capabilities to cover a large amount of space. We've got the team ready to roll. We've got physicians, we've got coaches. We have somebody on the science side. His name is Matt.
A scientist.
I'm helping on all sorts of different things, so it's gonna be good.
Yeah,
cool. Can't wait to get this thing going.
Yeah,
cool.
Me too.
Likewise.
Yep. All right. Well, thanks so much for coming by, guys. It's been a lot of fun, as always.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Thanks.
We're gonna Knock it out of the park.
That's right.
All right.